Stone Brothers production.
Hello, welcome back to part 2 of the California series on serial killers. This is going to be a men and women serial killer list. So let's begin. Number 7, Donna Sue Gray. Gray was born on December 6, 1957 to Russell Armbrust and Beverly Arnett. Armbrust being Donna Sue Gray's previous name before. Her father, Russell Armbrust, worked as a hairdresser and had 3 previous marriages before marrying Beverly, who was a former beauty queen. Beverly Gray's mom had several miscarriages before Donna was born. Beverly was a heavy shopaholic who would regularly max out her husband's credit cards. Her father was soon out of the picture when he cheated on her with another older woman, which angered her and divorce was filed. Donna Sue, being only 2 years old, rarely would see her father after this, and she began acting out to get attention. Whenever Beverly disciplined her, Donna would retaliate by stealing money and candy and would occasionally fly into fits of violence. In school, she did not get along with other classmates and performed poorly in all her classes. She was suspended multiple times from school for forging notes to get out of class. Unfortunately, her mother passed away from breast cancer and she had to live with her father and stepmother. Her stepmother found drugs in her room when snooping around and kicked her out of the house. Shortly after, Donna Sue graduated high school from Newport in 1976. She met and lived with their skydiving instructor, Rob, for the next several years. He helped her with nursing school and she became an expert skydiver. In 1981, she graduated from nursing school and for the next few years had an on-again and off-again relationship with Chris Dodson, a windsurfer. Donna stayed with Dodson for long enough to get married, which didn't last long because of her dedication to being a serious athlete and being physically fit. She also put them in debt many times. At this point, she ruined even her relationship with her other family because of her aunt's will. She was a labor and delivery nurse at Inland Valley Regional Medical Center and lived in a gated community of Canyon Lake where she had several business ventures under the name Gray Matter. Soon after her husband left her in early 1993, she moved in with her friend and her lover, Jim Wilkins, and his son Jason. She filed for divorce from Gray, though this was not finalized until after Donna had been in jail for quite some time. She and Gray had filed for bankruptcy to hold off on their foreclosures on their Canyon Lake house. On November 24, 1993, she was fired from the hospital where she worked for stealing Demerol and other opiate painkillers. On February 14, 1994, Donna sent words through Gray's parents that she wanted to meet with her husband. He initially agreed to meet but did not show up. Later the next day, she killed Norma Davis, which was an elderly lady she lived with at the time. Gray later on found out she was planning to kill him for a life insurance policy. Norma Davis had been dead for 2 days where she was found by her neighbor. Davis had a wood-handled utility knife sticking out of her neck and a fillet knife sticking out of her chest. Other than a broken fingernail, she had no other marks. A ripped phone cord and a little evidence was found at the scene. She received no conviction upon killing her because of lack of evidence. June Roberts was her next victim, who died on February 28, 1994. She lived in a gated community like Norma did, which was Dana's previous victim. Dana wanted to borrow a book about controlling a drinking problem. Roberts let Gray in her house. While Roberts was looking for the book, Gray unplugged Roberts' phone cords, both the straight and the curly one, and strangled Roberts with them. When Roberts was dead, she searched through her credit card stealing too, which an hour later she went on another massive shopping spree at a upscale shopping center in Temecula. She attacked Dorinda Hawkins at her job at an antique store. She had been working alone and Gray came around hassling to buy a picture frame for a photo of her deceased mother. She was unsuccessful in killing her with a phone cord, which seemed to be her method in killing her victims with whatever she sees fit. She told the detectives about her, and the story was in the newspaper the next day. On March 16, 1984, Gray killed her final victim, Dora B.B., age 87. A few minutes after she showed home from a doctor's appointment, Gray pulled up in the front of her house, knocked on her door asking for directions, and she was invited inside to look at a map. Many residents of Canyon Lake were scared to go out of their homes because of recent murders and believed there was a safety in numbers. They theorized the killings because of the cults who engaged ritual sacrifice. She was finally caught after going on a shopping spree with Robert's card. She spent so much money that the credit card merchants called her family about big spending because of her not answering her calls, and detectives tied in the clues after finding multiple merchants fitting in her description. Donna Gray was pled to life without possibility of parole and not being charged with Norma's murder, which would leave her a kill count at 3 victims and possibly more around the area, which classifies her as a serial killer. Number 6. Dorothea Helen Puente. Puente was born in San Bernardino County, California, to 2 alcoholics. Her father was a cotton picker and both her parents abused her, and often she had to scavenge for food. Her father died when she was 4 of tuberculosis. When she was 6, her mother died in a motorcycle accident, so she was sent to an orphanage until relatives from Fresno, California took her in. In later life, she lied about her childhood, saying she was one of 18 children who were all born and raised in Mexico. In 1946, she was married for the first time, but her husband died of a heart attack within 2 years. She did not work and forged checks until she was caught and sentenced a year in jail, although she was paroled after 6 months. Soon after her release, she had gotten impregnated by a man she really knew, and gave birth to a baby girl, which she had to give up for adoption. In 1952, she married a Swedish man named Axel Johnson and had a violent 14-year marriage. In 1960, she was arrested in a brothel and was sentenced to 90 days in the Sacramento County Jail. After her release, she was arrested again because of vagrancy. Her crimes became worse over time, and she finally settled down working as a nurse aide, caring for disabled and elderly people in private homes. In a short time, she started to manage boarding homes. She divorced Johansson in 1966 and married Robert Puente in Mexico City, a man who was 19 years younger. Roberto had trouble staying faithful to Dorothea, and the marriage only lasted 2 years. Shortly before the end of the marriage, she had bought a 3-story, 6-bedroom care home at 2100 F Street in Sacramento, California. There she provided care and comfort to the homeless and impoverished of the area. The first sign of something wrong was when the neighbors noticed an odd activity of a homeless alcoholic man known as Chief, whom Dorothea stated she had adopted and made him her handyman. Dorothea had Chief dig in the basement and cart soil and rubbish away in a wheelbarrow. The basement was then covered with concrete slabs there as well. Soon afterward, Chief mysteriously disappeared. Around this time, Dorothea married for the 4th time in 1976 to a Pedro Montalvo, who was a physical abusive alcoholic. She soon divorced him months later and began living in an upstairs apartment in downtown Sacramento. The rest of her time, she got caught by forging checks. In the end, she got caught with enough evidence that she was charged. And in the end, she got charged with enough evidence she was charged with 3 murders to the place she is living at now, not counting the 6 other counts at her 16-room boarding home. Most of her killings were purely for financial gain, and she had over $5,000 a month to pay for rent and other various costs. People praised her for her nice nature to the tenants, but did not know what happened behind closed doors. Most of her victims were poisoned or took over the amount recommended for the medication on pills such as codeine, which is heavily regulated now. On November 11, 1988, police started searching for the disappearance of tenant Alberto Montoya, a developmentally disabled man with schizophrenia whose social worker had reported him missing. After noticing a new disordered soil on the property, they uncovered the body of tenant Leona Carpenter, age 78. 7 bodies were eventually found, and Puente was charged with the total of 9 murders, convicted of 3, and sentenced to 2 life sentences. During the investigation, Dorothea was not initially a suspect, but tied more and more murders to the case as it was unraveled. She tried escaping, and police became more suspicious of her, and she was charged in 1993 with only 3 counts due to the plea for a lifetime imprisonment. She died in prison on March 27, 2011, due to natural causes at the age of 82. Number 5. Anton Charles Costa, A.K.A. the Tony Costa Cape Cod Murders. Costa was born in 1945. As an infant, his father died during World War II. Around the age of 7, Tony told his mother that a man would enter his room by night, unidentifiable as his father, the Silent Prowler. In November 1961, at the age of 16, he invaded a Somerville, Massachusetts apartment and bending over the bed of a teenage girl before she woke up, and her screams drove him off. Later, he returned and tried to drag her down the stairs of her apartment house, but her neighbors intervened. He was convicted of burglary and assault on January 4, 1962, where he had a 1-year sentence and 3 years of probation. Shortly afterward, he met his soon-to-be wife and married her in April 1963, fathering 3 children before drugs complicated the relationship, producing bizarre and irresponsible behavior. In June 1966, he brought home 2 hippie chicks, Bonnie Williams and Diane Federoff, with the intent of driving them to Pennsylvania, moving on alone from there to California. Both women were considered missing 10 days later, first known to be the first murders, but he was never convicted for them. In August of 1967, hiking in Turo Woods, near Provincetown, Costa, shot a female acquaintance with an arrow. Afterward, he apologized for the accident. By 1968, his marriage was in pieces, and he drove to California in the latter days of January, setting briefly in San Francisco. Another woman vanished the same day, Barbara Spalding, police believing she was murdered by Costa as well. Soon after, he burglarized a doctor's office on May 17th, stealing various surgical equipment and drugs valued at $5,000. A week later, another woman vanished from her home in Provincetown. She was reported by police on June 14th, almost a month after she went missing. He soon again got married to Susan Perry, but only lasted a week before she disappeared on September 10th. When questioned, Costa told his friends that she had gone to Mexico. He was arrested for driving with a suspended license and soon after failed to support his wife and children. When released, he met another hippie, Christine Gallant, sharing drugs and spending time with her. On the weekend of November 23rd, Gallant was found dead in her New York apartment, drowned in a bathtub after a barbiturate overdose. Months later, on January 24, 1969, Patricia Walsh and Mary Wysocki disappeared on a visit to Provincetown. 2 weeks later, searchers found a woman's mutilated body at a old Truro cemetery, identified as the last remains of Susan Perry, which was his wife that he said that she left to Mexico. On March 4th, the dismembered bodies of Walsh, Wysocki, and Sidney Monzon were found buried together, a mile and a half from the first gravesite. Both Walsh and Wysocki had been found with shots in their heads, with their hearts removed for all 3 victims, and teeth marks with evidence of necrophilia. Investigators learned that Costa met up with all 4 individuals at some point when they all went missing. He was arrested on suspicion of murder, and detectives learned that the burial site was Costa's private garden, used for stashing drugs and growing marijuana. Costa changed his story several times, implicating that his innocent friends committed the murders while failing several polygraph examinations. Examined on March 31st, resulting in him being diagnosed as a schizoid personality disorder. While sentenced to life imprisonment on a trial, he was considered to have a nickname of the Cape Cod Murders, as people thought he committed many more murders than he was convicted of. He was also very much into satanic rituals, as that is what many times he would have a copy of ritual magic and the occult, including a copy of Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. This is why prosecutors did not believe his pleas were for his innocence. He was then found 4 years later, on May 12, 1974, hanging in his prison cell with a leather belt round his neck. Some believing he was murdered instead of hanging himself because the force it would take to kill himself, on top of him biting his tongue off and losing his shoe, struggling in the process. Coroners could not find out if someone committed the crime in prison, so they held it to be a suicide. People still go to his famous garden site hoping to uncover more secrets and learn about his past. Number 4. David Joseph Carpenter, a.k.a. the Trailside Killers. Carpenter was born and raised in San Francisco. Carpenter was physically abused as a child by his alcoholic father and tyrannical mother. As a boy, he suffered a severe stutter and bedwetting problems and tortured animals. At 17, he was incarcerated for molesting 2 of his cousins. He later on then married his wife in 1955 and had 3 children with her. Carpenter had a serious propensity for violence, but didn't get into serious trouble until the age of 33, when Carpenter befriended a woman and lured her into the woods in Presidio, where he bound her with clotheslines and beat her with a hammer and stabbed her in the hand. Luckily, a military patrol officer caught him in the act. Carpenter fired at him with a gun, but missed and was injured by return fire and was arrested. Next year, Carpenter was sentenced to a total of 14 years in prison for 1 count of assault with intent to commit murder and 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. While waiting on trial for a year, he was charged with 1 count of assault with the intent to commit murder and 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. While in prison, his wife left him, and psychiatrists diagnosed Carpenter to have sociopathic personality disorder and an IQ of 125, which is fairly high. He became married soon after leaving prison, serving 9 years. The second marriage failed as the last one did before. Soon after, Carpenter got sick of all the women and decided to go on a month-long series of attacks against women from the end of January to the beginning of February. He first attacked women in a car, hitting with his own car, and attempted to rape and stab her, although she made it away safely. She was able to get his license plate number. Carpenter then went on the same day, breaking into another woman's home, kidnapping her, raped her, and stole her car. He was known to be as the Zodiac Killer, but charges were dropped without enough evidence to prove it. On February 3rd, he stole a woman's car and then raped another woman. While her infant child was present during the attacks, he finally was arrested the same day. His victims goes as follows. His first victim may have been an acquaintance, Annie Kelly Manhavar, who disappeared from her home in late 1979 and was found dead in Mount Tamalpais Park, located in San Francisco Bay Area. Her death was not linked to Carpenter until after his arrest. He was also linked to 3 more murders in the same area. In August of 1979, Akane disappeared from the park while hiking. She was found shot in the back of the head in a kneeling position. They believe she was friends with Kelly, who died first. Then in March of 1980, Barbara Schwartz, age 23, was found in the same position as Kane, but died of stab wounds to the chest. 26-year-old Ann Alderson was next in October, when she was found shot in the head after vanishing during a jog. They then thought it was a different suspect that killed his mother, and the mother was hiding in surrounded woods for a few days. After this, he was soon cleared of suspicion from police. Soon after, Carpenter made a mark in the media after killing Shauna May and Deanna O'Connell, who both disappeared and was found both shot in the head. If it wasn't enough, 2 more bodies were found, Cynthia Moreland and Richard Towers, age 18 and age 19. At this point, parkgoers were scared to even leave their homes. Soon after, Carpenter struck again, killing Ellen Hansen in a park near Santa Cruz. Her boyfriend survived, however, and gave police enough of a description to finally release a composite sketch of the Carpenter. Cops finally had a break on May 1st, 1981, but had to lose another victim, Heather Skaggs, age 20. He was rumored to have tried to date her in the past, and cops went to his place of residence asking him questions, finding out that his red car was seen at the scene of the murder. They finally found Heather's body and charged Carpenter with the crime. The jury and judge charged Carpenter with 7 counts of murder, and possibly more, as the latest count on him was 30 or more years after him being sentenced to death on July 6, 1984. The Trailside Killer is a nickname that will stick to Carpenter long after his life has ended. Number 3. Randall Brent Woodfield, a.k.a. the I-5 Killer, or the I-5 Bandit. Woodfield was infamous for killing on the I-5 highway running from Washington to California, where he committed multiple sexual assaults, robberies, and murders for primarily women. Woodfield was born in Salem, Oregon, in December of 1950, and was an all-American boy next door. He made very good grades, and coaches in high school recognized his great natural athletic abilities after being a star of the Newport's football team. Woodfield started to expose himself in public, and everybody laughed it off at first, so the coaching staff suppressed him of being arrested to keep him eligible for a football team. In August of 1970, he was picked up again to avoid arrest after vandalizing his ex-girlfriend's apartment. 2 years later, in Vancouver, Washington, he got his first adult arrest charge of indecent exposure and receiving a suspended sentence. Another arrest similar to this happened in Portland, earning him more suspended time from football in June of 1973. Woodfield got lucky that year because of being drafted by the Green Bay Packers, but he couldn't stop his problems with the trip across the country. In 1974, after a dozen flashing incidents called an unwanted attention to Woodfield, and he was released by Packers and came home as a failure. In early of 1975, several women described Woodfield holding up a knife to them, forcing them to perform oral sex before their handbags were robbed. Policewomen were staked out as a decoy, and Woodfield was arrested after making another attempt on March 3rd after stealing money from one of the officers. In April, he pleaded guilty of second-degree robbery, giving him a 10-year sentence. He was released on parole after serving 4 years of that sentence in July of 1979. In 1979, Woodfield started his 2-year robbery spree, holding up at gas stations, ice cream parlors, and homes along Interstate 5 freeway. Several of his female victims were sexually assaulted, murdered, or both. On October 9, 1980, a former classmate of Woodfield named Cherry Ayers was raped and murdered in Portland, bludgeoned her in the head, and stabbed multiple times in the neck. Woodfield was questioned multiple times by homicide detectives, and he refused to sit for a polygraph examination. They found him being evasive and deceptive, but his blood type did not match the semen found inside the victim's body, and he was not charged for that. A month later, while still in Portland, Darcy Fix and Doug Altick were shot to death, execution style, in Altick's apartment. The female was friends with one of Woodfield's closest friends, but police didn't suggest him as the killer. In December of 1980, he continued his robbery rampage in Oregon and Washington with a phony beard, sexual assaulting women. By January of 1981, police called the suspect the I-5 Bandit. He continued to sexually assault women, abusing them and robbing, but they knew at this point he stayed along the I-5 freeway. On February 3, 1981, Dona Eckerd, aged 37, and her 14-year-old daughter were both found dead in their homes at Mountain Gantum, California, north of Redding. They were both found dead together in bed, each shot several times in the head, with lab tests revealing that the little girl had been sodomized. Then the same day, another woman was raped after being held up in Redding. The bandit continued to rob and sexually assault women in the beginning of February throughout California to Washington. On February 15th, a former girlfriend of Woodfield, Julie Reitz, was shot and killed at her home in Beaverton, Oregon. The investigation had focused on Woodfield soon after, by February 28th. By that time, the I-5 Bandit had struck 3 more times, in Eugene on February 18th and February 21st, with a final sexual assault in Corvallis on February 25th. Interrogation of Woodfield was attempted on March 3, 1981, which led to a search of his apartment 2 days later. On March 7th, he was taken into custody after several of his victims picked him from the police lineup. By March 16th, indictments were coming in from various jurisdictions in Washington and Oregon, including multiple counts of murder, rape, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robberies, and possession of firearms by an ex-convict. Courts in Salem, Oregon got to Woodfield first, charging him with murder, attempted murder, and 2 counts of sodomy. He was convicted on all charges on June 26, 1981, and was sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. By December of 1981, he got 35 more years added onto his sentence for other similar charges in Benton County, Oregon. As officers began to follow Woodfield's trails along I-5, they stumbled over the other victims, one being Sylvia Durante, aged 21, had been strangled in Seattle and dumped by a highway in December of 1979. At least 4 women had died in Huntington Beach, California, while Woodfield was sunning himself in the same area, and all were killed in a similar style. Despite his links to 13 homicides and countless other crimes, the I-5 killer would not go to court on a majority of his offenses because of not being able to afford the endless string of trials. The state is still satisfied with 3 murder convictions and other multiple charges, keeping him in prison for the rest of his life. By 1990, he was suspected in at least 44 homicides, as well as up to 60 sexual assaults, but in 2001 and 2006, DNA testing linked Woodfield in at least 2 additional murders in Oregon from 1980 to 1981. Finally, in May of 2012, he was linked to 3 more cold cases through DNA, victims being Darcy Fix and Doug Altick in November of 1980, and his former girlfriend Julie Reitz in February of 1981. Number 2, Edmund Emil Kemper III, A.K.A. the co-ed killer. Kemper was born on December 18th of 1948 in Burbank, California, being the middle child of E. and Clarnell Kemper. After his parents divorced in 1957, he moved in with his mother and 2 sisters to Montana. Kemper had a difficult relationship with his alcoholic mother, as she was very harsh towards him, blaming him for all his problems. Kemper stated that when he was 10 years old, she forced him to live in the basement away from his sisters, whom she feared he might harm in some way. He was a smart boy with a near genius IQ, however, he displayed sociopathic behavior as a young child, which is why his mother kept him away from his sisters. Kemper had dark feelings towards his mother, dreaming about killing her. He cut off the heads of his sister's dolls and even coerced the girls into playing a game he called the gas chamber, in which he had them blindfolded and led them into a chair where he pretended to scream in pain until he died. His first victims were his cats. He buried one of them alive, and the second cat was slaughtered with a knife at the age of 13. His mother also had a personality disorder where she would go into fits of rage towards her son, Kemper. He went to live with his father for a time, but ended up back with his mother, who decided to send the bothered teenager to live with his paternal grandparents in North Fork, California. Not long staying with his grandparents, Kemper committed his worst crime yet as a teen by killing both of his grandparents. He stated that he hated living on the farm and became bored thinking of how it would feel to kill Grandma. Kemper did just that and shot his grandmother in the kitchen after an argument. When his grandfather returned home, Kemper went outside and shot him by his car and then hid the body. Afterwards, troubled Kemper called his mother, who told him to call the police and tell them what happened. Later he was arrested, and when asked why he did it, he stated to see what it felt like. When his grandfather showed up, he just wanted to make sure he didn't find out that he killed her. For his crimes, he was handed over to the California Youth Authority. He underwent a variety of tests showing he was a paranoid schizo and had a very high IQ. They soon sent him to Atascadero State Hospital, where he was put in with the mentally ill convicts. He was finally released by the age of 21, despite his prison doctor stating he'd stay away from his mother for physically abusing him, and decided against it. It worked out for him as his mother lived with him for a little bit before divorce, and pursuing her to go to college to the University of California. While there, he attended community college where he worked various jobs, landing employment with Department of Transportation in 1971. He then applied to become a state trooper, but he was rejected because of his size. He weighed around 300 pounds and was 6'9", which led to his nickname being Big Ed. He did hang out with some police officers, giving him slight training for the fun of it. Kemper even had a car that resembled a police cruiser. This is how much he wanted to be a law enforcement. The same year, he began working for the highway department. He was also hit while out on his motorcycle and his arms were badly injured. He had received over $15,000 for his settlement. He soon after lost his job and was having hard times finding work, so he decided to use his settlement money to buy a new car and some tools, which he stored away for his next sinister awakening years after being released. Kemper loved hanging out with female hitchhikers, picking them up and letting them go to their destination while having decent conversations, but this changed in a halt when he offered a ride to two Fresno State students, Mary Pesky and Anita Lucchesi. They never made it to their destination to school, and a reporter was missing there afterward. But nothing was known of their fates until August 15th, when a female head was discovered in the woods near Santa Cruz and later was identified as Pesky. Anita's remains were never found, and police found how he stabbed and strangled both victims. He had sex with their headless and handless corpses after back at his apartment. Later that year, on September 14th, 1972, Kemper picked up a 15-year-old A.K.A. who had decided to hitchhike rather than wait for a bus, taking her to a dance class. According to Kemper, he parked in a desolate area where he told her not to scream, taping her mouth shut, blocked her nostrils until she passed out. He took her out of the car and she awakened again moments later. He began strangling her again until she stopped breathing completely and decided to rape her corpse like the other two women and leave her body in his apartment, placed at his bed, where he dissected her just like he did with the previous two victims. Police thought her body was unrelated to the other two deaths of Mary and Anita. 4 months have passed and more victims start to amass onto the scene in the Bay Area, and public concern was aroused, but Edmund was under no suspicion for any of the killings. On January 8th, 1973, Edmund bought a .22 caliber automatic pistol, even though he was forbidden to own firearms because of his past offenses. He had no problem purchasing the firearm. Luckily for him, he continued his heinous acts. He began on the same day that he purchased the pistol, and he picked up Cindy and drove her into the hills near Watsonville, where he forced her into the trunk and shot her with his new gun, and bullets were lodged into her skull. She was then brought back into his mother's place. He had sex with her corpse as well, and he mutilated her like the rest, putting her body in the ocean while removing the bullets so it did not trace back to him. He was extraordinarily careful, and within a month he was ready to kill again. This time he decided to take his mother's parking sticker for her university, driving there to picking up two more women, Rosa Lynn Thorpe and Alice Liu. Shortly after he picked them up, he shot both of them in the head and then drove past the campus security to avoid detection. He removed their bullets from their heads, hid their remains until their bodies were discovered near Highway 1 in San Mateo County. At the time of his murders, there were other notorious serial killers around this time, John Fraser and Herbert Mullins, who were also perpetrating their own crimes in the area, resulting in Santa Cruz receiving the nickname Murder Capital of the World. 2 months after this, he was living with his mother again, and this is where he committed his last two murders on April 1973. He went to his mother's home, where both had unpleasant exchange. After she went to sleep, he took out a hammer and slamming it on her head. Afterwards, he slit her throat and decapitated her heads and hand, but also removed her larynx and put it down in the garbage disposal. This goes to show you how much he despised his mother. Shortly after hiding his mom's body parts, he called her friend Sally Hallett and invited her over to the house after he thought if he had killed her, it would disguise him as a suspect in his mother's murder. He originally planned this dinner to happen, but after altercation with his mother, this changed. Sally showed soon after and was strangled to death by A.K.A.'s scarf. He then left a note at the house stating no need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible man's murderous butcher. It was quick asleep the way I wanted it, not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do. Kemper soon after left the scene and saw that no one knew he committed the murders. He finally went to the phone booth and called the police confessing it was him, and the police did not take him seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, Kemper called back again asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He then confessed the murders of his mother and Hallett, and also confessed to the rest of his murders. He was also dubbed as the co-ed killer and was sentenced to life in prison and denied multiple times where he could have been reported to go out. But he was found not fit to return to society and stating he was happy going about life in prison. Number 1. Chester Dwayne Turner. Turner moved to Los Angeles with his mother at the age of 5. After his parents split up, he went to public schools but dropped out of high school. He was a delivery driver and a cook at a Domino's Pizza and lived with his mother until she moved to Utah. After that, he moved to many homeless shelters and missions. Turner was put into jail 7 times from 1995 to 2002, which most of the charges were nonviolent offenses, and one being assault charge on an officer in April of 1997. Turner has been connected through DNA to 13-plus murders that occurred in Los Angeles between 1987 to 1998. 11 of the murders occurred in a 4-block-wide corridor that ran on both sides of Figueroa Street between Gage Avenue and 108th Street. That area was notorious for prostitution, drug, and violence. They described him as a savage predator fixated on violence, dominance, and control from which he derived from sexual satisfaction. 2 of his more prolific murders was 2 pregnant women. One was Regina Washington, age 27, who was 6.5 months pregnant when she was choked to death with an electrical cord behind the house that was vacant in September of 1989. Her daughter was one of the murdered victims as well. Another woman, age 29, Andrea Triplett, was 5.5 months pregnant when she was strangled to death on April of 1983, but was not charged with the unborn child because of the California's law stated 5.5 months fetus was not considered valuable. His victims were all African American women, were all found strangled and tossed in random vacant buildings, alleys, and parks nude. There were no eyewitnesses to any of his murders, unfortunately, but there was a grainy security camera footage recording Paula Vance, age 38, being thrown to the ground, and after 15 minutes a man could be seen walking away from her body. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison in the early 2000s for assaulting a 47-year-old woman in March of 2002 and threatened to kill her if she told the police. After that sentence, he was required to give a DNA sample, and in September of 2003, he had a DNA match for multiple murders. He was convicted on 11 murders, which being Paula Vance, age 24, Brenda Bryce, age 39, and a portable toilet near Little Tokyo, Diane Johnson, age 21, Ernest, age 26, the 2 pregnant women, Washington and Triplett, an unborn child, and a few other women, giving him the death penalty in July 10th of 2007. For 3 of his murders, David Allen Jones, age 28, was convicted, with 3 of his murders being wrongfully convicted for Tammy Christmas, Deborah Williams, and Mary Edwards. He was a mentally disabled part-time janitor who was barely illiterate and admitted using drugs with the victims in the areas where the bodies were found. Jones was released after 11 years in prison after DNA evidence proving Turner being the culprit and receiving $720,000 after filing a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. Turner was convicted on 4 additional murders on June 19, 2014, receiving another death sentence for those murders on June 26, 2014. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry for the delay in the videos lately, guys. I've had a hectic 2 weeks with work and artwork for the game. I will continue to post videos, but will update if there's any delays, guys. Next op tutorial should be up early next week. Like, share, and subscribe would be greatly appreciated, and I hope you have a good day.